Rank the albums, IAMX, with one more.
Took me a while to get around to this rank, as it was a bit of an onslaught of new material, although partially delayed. I've not actually yet bought or even listened to that stuff. I've listened to Machinate once, but I'll do the work in post. See, I'm not sure about buying hard copies online. I paid some import level prices for some of these, then later noticed that they swooped quite cheap on Music Magpie. I don't know, I'm seeing him live next month. Maybe I'll buy the stuff then, but I can listen to it online. I also could concatenate sneaker pimps into this video, and I've chosen not to. I don't know, there might not be as many combining discographies from different act names from here on, but as two separate discographies, that's like an easy and a medium, and if I put them together, it'd just be a hard, and a hard is harder than an easy plus a medium. Here's the medium. Although toward the harder level of medium, because it's just a pretty consistent discography, and aesthetically consistent to the extent that I can somewhat forget what's on which one. You know, it's on the black and red and white one. But we start with what may have been Sneaker Pimps to some extent at some point, but by itself is just a hella kinky debut album of someone having fun getting to grips with new software. It's noted that this first one was intended as a sneaky pimping until it became too pimpy and sneaking for that band and had a reband. I think there's a lot of cool stuff under Sneaker Pimps, but it was a bit limited by the very function of being a band, so Becoming X is the way to break free. I obviously relate to the self-identity as blank value. Have you seen my surname and my stuff? Now the act name doesn't feel like a sketchy guy who's gonna sell you Skechers. It invokes nothingness unto self. Relatable. Very debut-shaped, full of ideas. That's a good thing. Not necessarily refined, cheaper sounding than some things that come up later, but that's not a bad thing. This earlier stuff feels musically simpler, with everything a discrete note on a synth rather than a sweep of sound, fewer overdubs. Expertise doesn't make the music worse, it can make it more intense but less immediate. These songs on the first one are just all up front, and you gotta laud the chutzpah. It's the sound of someone who grew up British learning to become less British, and you've got to applaud that. Just full of ideas. It's not gonna top stacks except via kind of nostalgia, but it's briefly at the top of the stack whilst it's the only item there. It's just the relentlessness of the ideas here. You don't realize how generous 13 tracks are until you're well into a decade of single-digit track albums. Albums used to be as exciting as this. A very early pivot. I thought this soundtrack credited to Chris's real name would be negligible, then I put it on. It's got a few tracks from other artists and some requisite atmospheric moments, then the rest is just hard-driving sleaze rock with real instruments and everything. It's the more obvious music an American goth might do, like a Quake soundtrack, but a good one. Quake 2. The energy to this renders it ridiculous to have ended up as an obscurity among this discography. I'd make a case for taking it very seriously if it was meant a little more seriously, if the lyrics and vocals were more than pastiche, and if it were a couple steps more complete as a piece of XC work. Still, don't skip it. I'll buy this when I find it at a reasonable price. I don't know if recording live instruments just isn't his style anymore, but it's definitely worth a go if he's able to riff like this. Then things got yellow but didn't mellow. Nearly as many ideas, but way more refinement. No longer mooching, just nailing it. If you're not on board by this one, the whole career isn't for you. This album has all the strengths of the prior and the following one, which I'll tell you about soon. Be patient. For now, jump to this timecode. This one right here, the current one. Don't change timecode. Listen to me right now. Now you have all that information, you can agree that this is the best IAMX album. It's the rare way the very artificial sounds match the energy of human music, something to continually aspire to, and it's just the sound sound sweet spot of this career. Nothing obscured, but nothing too obvious. If I do the claim where every song could be a single, that undermines their depth, but I guess at least it highlights their cheek. There's an alternative release with different mixes. I had a bit of an explore to see if I could offer details in that version, then realized this is staying at the top of the pile, whatever. I got lazy. Tell me in the comments how it compares. It was relatively recent that I got into IAMX, and as I'm losing my dexterity to degenerative illness, I do wonder, like, I should do more computer-based music, and maybe I should rip him off, and I just don't have the patience to rip him off. That's probably for the better. We don't need a pale imitation, we've got this. And the winning streak continues. No longer are there any elements of somewhat hokey electro clash. It's just full focus, gothic, cabaret, post-midnight. But still using the armory and point of view of electronic music. The song structure remains pristine. It evokes the panic attack of a nightclub, but one you actually might want to stay in. This one was published with different track lists, and my version goes like that. It's got a remix shoved into the track list a bit too soon. In chewing through this music lately, I also streamed the other running order, and I think that works better. There's a bit of an obnoxious pile-up here that is far better spaced out in the original set, but, you know, this literally has all those tracks and more, so it's a bit silly to advocate for fewer tracks. Trying to judge just on the content and not like the running order, it's gone a bit too far into the loud-ass dance tropes for my liking. His genius is still on pretty thorough full display, but the elegance is missing at times. But we don't always need elegance. There's not really anything wrong with this. I'm just trying to find ways to delineate this very consistent career. So in parts it's getting to a noisy EDM or EBM or something. This album is full of engaging stuff, but doesn't host any songs I thoroughly love or would lament the absence of in a live set or compilation, and that's where the bar is set. Then there's a healthy balance between absolute noise immersion and the orchestration of those second and third releases. Sure, the vocals are somewhat buried, but that's pretty welcome here. Don't bury it under a 4/4 thud that ducks the rest of the mix. No, do this. Ensure that it's still expressing something awesome. This album unifies all the ingredients we've heard so far, both into each composition, and for a relatively diverse album of everything he's learned. And then really it's just as loud again, but doesn't lose out on anything. Nothing needed to compromise. You could turn both dials up to 11. Metanoia goes forward with a bit more brand identity, mining depression for music, like all good artists should. You've got to use the depression while it lasts. I think going chronologically by this point, maybe we'd benefit from a bit more branching out, but he knows what he's good at. Remixers maybe don't, but ranking albums isn't about remixes. This was just released with 2 discs. I think I paid a lot for this one, and the second disc it wasn't really worth anything creatively. But then there's disc 1, which fully justifies the approach of making a mini album. I mean, I'm sure there's many things that just get called albums that have the same length, and even the same number of tracks. But with just this 7, that means that every second can be perfected. And then of course it also loses some ranking points for brevity. It's only a couple of production errors that hold this one down. I know his voice has always been processed and it's inherent to the genre, just some moments when it sounds more like keyboard or impediments to music, and certain loudnesses. I just said vocals are buried on unified field. Maybe they're overcorrecting here. Branching out did happen as he went into instrumental music, and it's a really welcome, satisfying version of that when it's on, but of course it kind of lacks the hooks of vocal music. Am I uncultured to end up inevitably ranking ranking this relatively low. I don't know, it functions very well being what it is, and was the right move and a very justified move. There's a concise variety to this that makes it worth playing in full when you don't want the distractions of words or tunes constructed for words. So I'll place it here with thorough respect. Because then we're in the era where you do call things a full-length release when it has fewer than 10 tracks. I mean, I know that was already true in like the 60s and 70s. It just seemed to re-emerge just short of a decade ago. I'll take it if it's all entirely honed, as I mentioned earlier. And this disc somewhat lacks for that. You know, if you can look at a list of fewer than 10 tracks and say that some of them you're not that into, it's ultimately not going to rank high. But what has innovated here is the embarrassing moment for a goth expression of like actual comfort and happiness within sound. You know, all that falsetto wailing about kinks over Berlin dungeon music you somewhat compromise the dignity of when you smile. Alive and new light reaches for some new sounds, kind of soaring. I commend it for having its own thing going on. It just doesn't feel as consequential or important as we're used to by now. Oh look, the song we called Stardust has been renamed in their YouTube uploads. What's that all about? Now, I respect the chops to pull off positive goth music. He's done it, but it's still middling, or lower than middling. One of those acoustic reinterpretations albums. Again, varying the approach. Awesome, you're varying the approach, and that's a way to get something ranked relatively low. The specifics of the approach in this one, making every sound with just himself and a guitar, and layering upon oneself. Awesome, and considering how few agile instruments we've heard throughout the discography, very refreshing. The songs are quite drawn out, and I'm not sure there's any one of these that I prefer to the original, but you know, a refreshing alternative. You could call this the alternative. I have a lot of respect for these reinterpretation projects. Then when it comes to ranking, I just can't build them up because they're inherently inessential and referential. A few tracks chosen were already so gentle that it's not interesting to present them this way, and then those that weren't are undermined by this more sedate format. The blunt lyrics and higher vocal notes pierce too much without something to cushion them. Wait, blunt? Pierce? Oh yeah, whatever. It's pleasant for particular situations though, and given how loud and synthetic this discography is, it's almost not inessential, it's unique. Guitar uses percussion I really respect, and it's just lovely to hear clean string work. And then there's stuff I haven't bought yet. I was keeping up with social media posts for these new few, but social media as a system has gone rotten, and even at its best, online fandom is just fawning. I've managed to go off stuff before when seeing social media posts and fandom, so I took a break and came back right now in time for a rare UK show. I'll let you know in a comment if I discover at the gig that they're actually a shit-hot live band or the kink isn't boring. The mostly or nearly instrumentals of Machinate are no less talented or creative than what we've seen so far or the other instrumental album, but they are less charismatic and engaging, maybe via their live construction having less room for honing. It's good stuff, but among this stuff, it's low good stuff. This one can be a bit of a charm, more sound than melody. Also, when there are vocals, you hear his mouth dripping. I don't quite understand the part 1, part 2 approach of this fault line stuff. When people release albums in parts, it just feels like they've given up on titles and they're choosing a more disposable approach. Still, it's rare enough that something labeled part 1 even ends up with a part 2, so let's commend that. Maybe the motive is to justify having albums less than 40 minutes, something that's not rare, and we're definitely in the era of fewer than 10 tracks. Doing one of those isn't a problem, but maybe he didn't want to admit to doing several in a row. Because here's another dose, just without anything catchy. I admit my potential recency bias and no CD yet bias. Sorry if I'm wrong because of how time works. Would it help if I mispronounced the plural of bias, biases? please like and subscribe. Having fewer tracks hasn't increased focus. I guess it feels like a Patreon subscription model now, and this fulfills that contract without innovating or impressing. It's got its moments. Maybe they're called parts 1 and 2 because if you put them together, that's enough for a good album. Yeah, I vibe much more with this second one while it lasts. It's funny, I tend to instinctively disagree with the idea that careers drop off, bands get worse, newer albums are inferior, and I'll still stand up for that verbally here. But when you actually weigh it up in album-shaped doses, there's factors like being in the right place as a listener when it's new, but there's also the kind of creative mirror of that consideration, the creator being in the right place. But yeah, offer listeners less, and if it's not absolutely honed and novel, it'll be accepted for being less. I've realized very late on in editing this that there's an echo of the acoustic thingy with 5 fresh recordings, which just about meets my eligibility criteria. It's refreshing but brief. I'm putting it down here mainly due to brevity and back reference, not the convenience of easy editing, but a full length of this quality could have gone several notches up. It's just not significant as it stands. This career is still going strong. Excellent.